All right, so news on the go for you. Just outside the Constitutional Court now, we're shifting gears. Let's hear an urgent briefing. There's going to be an urgent application by the IEC. In the lead-up to that, Mmusi Maimane is addressing the media outside. Take a listen.
As an intervening party to oppose the postponement of elections. We hold the view that the 27th of October as the day that was proclaimed ought to be the day that elections must be conducted. Fellow South Africans, I don't need to remind all of us that our country is in a grave crisis. The Auditor General has already reported on how many municipalities are in fact failing, are in a state of crisis. As I speak to you today, there are citizens in our country who are without water, who are without electricity. Some don't even have basic services. It is now common cause that local government has suffered even adversely and worse when it comes to state capture. And therefore, to have a government that then comes back to the people to say to the people that we demand for you to postpone elections for even longer is to prolong the suffering of many citizens. Now, like anyone else, I'm very conscious of the fact that these elections occur well within a pandemic. I stand with all South Africans to say we lament the deaths that have taken place, and we stand with all people to say elections must always be safe and must ensure that citizens are protected. But let me be clear about one thing, is the fact that the Constitution obliges the IEC to not only hold free and fair elections, but hold them regularly every 5 years with an extension of only 90 days. Given the conditions of the pandemic, it is our understanding that whether you hold them in October or a postponement up to February, elections for local government this year will always take place under a pandemic. It is improbable that in fact elections will occur outside of COVID. That is the first provision. Secondly, it is common cause that as citizens make the appropriate arrangements, our children, our students are going to colleges, they are going to schools as we gather today. Over 12 million citizens have gathered for school today as we speak, and they do so every day. Why is it impossible for the IEC to be able to make similar arrangements that follow health protocols that elections can proceed? Furthermore, we hold the ultimate view that elections can be held over 3 days. They can in fact start on the Monday so as to avoid crowding of citizens, so that proper social distancing can be observed, masks can be worn, citizens can exercise their democratic right over that period. And therefore we hold this view, saying that the considerations for postponement of elections are primarily from an executive and a political consideration. Take consciousness about the fact that a country such as Zambia has already now gone to elections. These elections were not seen as super spreader events. And in fact, the will of the people was upheld in an election that took place in Zambia. The same took place in Malawi. And in many ways, despite the differences in the US electoral system, imagine if you were to say to those citizens at the height of their pandemic, to say, look, hold on to President Trump for a number of months whilst we postpone elections in the midst of a pandemic. I feel that if we postpone elections, it would give the IEC an opportunity to avoid accountability where they should have properly prepared for the elections and ensured that elections were not only safe, but were accessible and relatively easy for people to gain access to. As we enter court today as One South Africa movement, we will be arguing a number of things. The first is that actually the IEC has a wealth of examples to follow. I've already cited some from within our continent. We saw events that took place in Uganda, and ultimately we're seeing international countries that simply say that it is possible to hold an election in a safe manner. And in my submissions to the Museneke Commission, I made a number of recommendations as to how an election can be held and can be safe. Secondly, we think that the IEC should be compelled by this court to be able to say, how do we implement these elections? Where do we take a micro scale of multiple elections? And therefore, we must ensure that their elections are free and fair and uphold the constitutional obligations. It is possible even at such a time such as this one. Thirdly, we will argue on behalf of municipalities. As we, as One South Africa movement, have already targeted tens and tens of municipalities, we've already identified associations that are already in those communities. They have not had a need to hold multiple rallies. They simply have gone home to home, community to community, registering people. So this political consideration that the only way one can hold a political messaging is by holding stadium events is a fallacy. What we would ask is that in fact people must be able to find a different way of campaigning. As everybody, if you're a business in this country, you've adjusted how you do your business. If you're a school, you've done likewise. And it's no unique for political parties, and therefore we stand behind and say people must be able to campaign differently in a pandemic. It is going to be with us at least for the next number of years, and we are saying the Constitutional Court cannot avoid the very imperative that says local government elections must proceed, a new council must be elected in order that that council can comply with its own legislative processes, such as passing a new budget, delivering basic services, and ensuring that, in fact, services are continued to citizens. I have massive respect for Justice Moseneke, and in our submissions, we made submissions before his commission. But I do believe the IEC erred in simply just approaching the Constitutional Court to come here and amend the South African Constitution. Our Constitution is sacred. It prescribes how it can be adjusted. It cannot be that those tasked with defending the Constitution must equally be the ones who rewrite or draft a different form as to how elections can be postponed or adjusting the Constitution. That ought to have been the job of Parliament in its rightful form as the Constitution prescribes, and that ultimately, as we have seen in the last year in the Disaster Management Act, Parliament has failed in its duties to write laws that work for citizens. Therefore today, we are saying it is a mistake to come to the Concord. We will argue that case. We will argue that elections can be free and fair, and we will argue further that ultimately that the pandemic will be with us for a number of months and maybe a year to come, and therefore we must proceed. I want to conclude by saying that the government has said that it will ultimately have vaccinated citizens. In my view, it's that as we have seen in this country, we're experiencing vaccine hesitancy. Many more citizens are not coming out, and I want to encourage as many people to get vaccinated as possible. But I do not believe that by the time elections potentially are going to be held in February of next year, that we would have achieved what we call community immunity.